I'm trying to recover from the flu. So don't get too close. And you can hear in my voice that it's not the usual voice. But I'm delighted to be here today. I think a whole lot of this couple and their family and the things that they are engaged in and involved in, involving us in. I would be remiss if I didn't thank these musicians. Brother, Brother Ledbetter, you brought together two genres that I love, jazz and the spiritual. And these young people, my goodness alive, Take Six, is that a group? They have nothing on you. You are wonderful. They gave me 10 minutes.
You have as much time as you need.
Well, I was going to give you 8 of those back, as they do in the Congress. John, I watch, C-SPAN from time to time, some of the craziness that's going on in our Congress. And every once in a while I hear him say, well, I'll give 8 minutes back. Well, maybe not. I prepared a statement, which I'm going to read, and then I'm going to make a couple of comments. I will tell at least one story since Demi set me up. Let me read what I did write a statement that I want to read. Martin Luther King, Jr. was a preacher theologian who was perhaps the one true spiritual genius that America has produced. And when he went to Montgomery, Alabama, in the mid-1950s, he went there as a preacher theologian and as the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church to replace another preacher prophet, the Reverend Vernon Johns, who had set the table for another course of social gospel for that congregation and that city. But he went there well prepared to assume that responsibility with a Crozier Seminary degree and a Doctor of Philosophy degree in systematic theology from Boston University, where he had studied with the most preeminent professors of personalism and the social gospel, such as L. Harold DeWolf, S. Paul Schilling, and the Dean, Walter George Mulder. He had been immersed in the Dean's Bread and Butter course, Ethical Aspects of Social Reconstruction. I took that course later with Dean Mulder, and I told the Dean, you ought to get an A for being able to remember the title of the course. Ethical Aspects of Social Reconstruction. He'd been immersed. He had sat with Howard Thurman in Marsh Chapel, been influenced by Thurman and his own mysticism, his own commitment to race and to the struggle for peace and justice in America. And so he came to Montgomery after studying with DeWolf, whose theology insisted that theology must be an active, living theology to be worthy of the church and the human heart. It was that preacher theologian, Martin King Jr., who was catapulted into the role of leadership in the Montgomery bus boycott, and to become the leader of a stride toward freedom in the streets of Montgomery and Birmingham and Selma and Anniston and throughout the South and into the hearts and souls of America. Call him a civil rights leader if you wish. Call him a Moses leading the people from segregation and discrimination to a land of freedom, equality, and justice. Call him a voice crying in the wilderness. Call him a drum major leading a band of freedom fighters. Call him a dreamer who dreamed dreams that one day his children would be judged by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. But always remember that he called himself a preacher theologian who was always a pastor of a church, leading and ministering to a congregation. Whether he was in Montgomery or whether he was in Atlanta, Martin Luther King Jr. was a preacher theologian, and that's what he called himself. It was as a preacher theologian that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King saw that to be at peace with the world is to be in conflict with the Lord. To be at peace with the world is to be in conflict with the Lord. He condemned racism, hate, and bigotry. He deplored war and violence and the exploitation of the poor. He called on our nation to take care of its children and its old people and the poor. A nation truly is judged by how it treats its children and its old people. Somebody ought to tell our Congress. Somebody ought to tell our Congress that to leave assault weapons in the hands of anybody on the streets is a travesty before God. Nobody needs a gun that shoots 100 bullets. Nobody needs assault weapons. Nobody needs Glock and all that other stuff that are killing our people. Oh, if Martin was here, John, you know and I know, he would stand and use his sonorous voice to condemn what happened in Connecticut. And he would call on our Congress. Our president pleaded with our nation the other night. Pleaded with our nation. Pleaded with our nation. But will our Congress hear? Well, if Martin was here, he'd implore you and me to speak to our congressmen, to speak to our senators, to speak to our leaders and say we need laws that control the kind of violence and the kind of weaponry that are in the hands of our people on the streets. Martin was a pastor theologian, preacher theologian. It was as a preacher theologian that in this very city he stood in the pulpit of National Cathedral and called on our nation, called on President Johnson and Secretary Rusk to come out of Vietnam. He was free to speak because he'd been called of God to be a spokesman for God, Amen. Which is what a prophet is. And he would endorse Lou and Demi, what you're doing here with Restore Together, because it is a part of what he would see as moving more closely to a beloved community. Jesus called it the kingdom of God. Mark used the language, beloved community. And I want to commend what you're doing here. Now, one story. Two, quick. I'll tell you how I met Martin Luther King. John may not know this either. I was 16 years old, a preacher. I was already preaching. I had preacher's license at 15 in Alabama. Well, I started as a Methodist. You had to get exhorter's license first, and then you got local preacher's license. So at 15, I got licensed. So at 16, I went to Montgomery, where Martin Luther King had just come to Dexter Avenue Baptist Church as a preacher, as the pastor of Dexter Avenue. But my good friend, William Curtis Dobbins, was the pastor of St. Paul Methodist Church, which was in Montgomery. You remember Dobbins, John. He was the pastor of St. Paul, and the parsonages were next door to each other. That is, the parsonage of Dexter Avenue and the parsonage. Parsonage means the place where the preacher lives. In case you all didn't know that word. So they were next door to each other, and I went down to Montgomery to preach for Dobbins for Youth Sunday. And so he met me at the bus station, and we went to his house, and he said, well, you know, there's a new preacher who's just come to Montgomery. I think you would like him. He went to Boston University, and he has a PhD from Boston University in systematic theology and philosophy of religion. I'm going to take you over so you can meet him. So we went over. He went to the parsonage of Dexter Avenue, and Coretta Scott King came to the door. And she said, oh, Reverend Dobbins, you're looking for Martin. He said, yes, I have a friend here from Gadsden, Alabama, and I want him to meet your husband. So I said, oh, he's not here. She said, I think he's probably in the rec room over at Alabama State College, which is not very far. You could walk to Alabama State from the parsonage there. So if you go to the rec, you'll probably find him there. So Reverend Dobbins and I went over to Alabama State to the rec room, and sure enough, the jukebox was going, and there was a fella. Y'all know what a jukebox is? I know y'all got other kinds of things now, but see, we had jukebox in our day. The jukebox was going, and I looked over, and there was a fellow draped over the jukebox, and he was listening to If I Don't Love Your Baby, Grits Ain't Groceries, Eggs Ain't Poultry, and Mona Lisa Was a Man. If I don't love your baby, grits ain't groceries, eggs ain't poultry, and Mona Lisa was a man. Well, now, I had just started preaching, you know. And up in North Alabama, where I came from, folk were pretty puritanical. You know what I mean by puritanical? Yeah, all right. We didn't listen to stuff like that, you know, supposedly. But there he was, listening to this jukebox. If I don't love your baby, grits ain't groceries, eggs ain't poultry, and Mona Lisa was a man. And Dr. Dobbins said, well, that's Dr. King. Really? Really? He looked at my face, and he could tell I was already making judgment about him. See? Well, when the jukebox finished and his record was ended, Reverend Dobbins introduced me, and he began a lecture using Shakespeare and Randall Niebuhr and Paul Tillich, and quoting poets and philosophers, a lecture on If I Don't Love Your Baby, Grits Ain't Groceries, Eggs Ain't Poultry, and Mona Lisa Was a Man. And I said, anybody who can lecture on that and make me believe, I'm willing to follow him wherever he's going. And so I made a decision right there that this was my leader. And he was my leader until that gun felled him in the mountains of Memphis, Tennessee. Tell you one other story quickly. I went back after I finished Boston University School of Theology, where he had gone. I studied with those same men that I talked about a minute ago that he studied with. And went back to Anniston, Alabama, to work with Nimrod Reynolds at 17th Street Baptist Church, my good friend, my closest friend in the world now, and to lead the civil rights movement with the Calhoun County Improvement Association. I was executive secretary of the Calhoun County Improvement Association. Nimrod was the president. We worked to try to change Anniston, Alabama, Calhoun County. I was beaten along with Reverend Reynolds on the steps of the public library in Anniston, Alabama, just trying to check out a book. Public library. September 15, 1963, the same Sunday afternoon, those little girls died in 16th Street Baptist Church that Sunday morning. They beat Reverend Reynolds and me. Guns, knives, chain, sticks. We escaped with our lives beaten. Martin came to Anniston shortly after that. Had a civil rights rally where he spoke and Ralph spoke, Ralph Abernathy spoke. And then we got in Reverend Reynolds' car to drive to Birmingham to open the conference, National Conference of Southern Christian Leadership Conference in Birmingham at A.G. Gaston Motel. Nimrod had just bought a new car. Now you have to understand, y'all know what a Bonneville is? You remember that? We're talking about 1963. You remember that boxy, great big boxy Bonneville? Well, Reverend Reynolds bought one of those. Not only did he buy one of those boxy, great big boxy Bonnevilles, but it was loud orange. And you couldn't miss it. Well, anyway, Dr. King came and spoke that evening. And Ralph Abernathy and Reverend Reynolds and, what is his name, John? His lieutenant who died. See, that's what happens when you get old and forgetful. A little short. Bernard Lee. Bernard Lee. So that we got in Reverend Reynolds' orange Bonneville, see, to go to Birmingham, drive to Birmingham, which is about 60 miles from Anniston. So Reverend Reynolds was driving, and Bernard was sitting in the passenger seat in the front, and I sat on the left side, and Martin was in the middle, and Ralph was on the other side. We got in the car, headed down Highway 1 from Anniston to Birmingham, on our way to Birmingham to open SCLC's conference. Now, in the excitement of Dr. King coming and Ralph Abernathy and Bernard Lee and all these people coming, Reverend Reynolds forgot to fill the car with gas. So we got this great big new Bonneville, orange Bonneville, headed down Route 1. Now, you have to understand, Route 1 was a lonely, desolate, no lights, dangerous highway for black folk at night. And it's Sunday night. And 5 preachers, black preachers, in a boxy, loud orange Bonneville. Except it gives out of gas. Right in front of a man's gas station called Mr. Adams. Adams was head of the White Citizens Council of Alabama. And there was a great big sign on all of Adams gas stations: "We do not serve gas to niggers." Where do you think we gave out of gas? Right in front, as life would have it, right in front of Mr. Adams' gas station. Martin had a great sense of humor. Thank God he was human. So he said to Ralph, Ralph, why don't you go in there Now you have to understand what Alabama was like on Sunday night in a white gas station with all these thugs and Ku Klux Klanners out in front of the gas station. You understand? Ralph, why don't you go in there and try to persuade Mr. Adams to give us some gas? Martin said, Ralph, why don't you go? If I go, the movement loses its leader. That's great sense of humor. In situations like that, you have to find a way to laugh because you know you're facing death, see? You know you're facing death. You knew that any minute, all 5 of these black preachers could be killed right there in Reverend Reynolds' Orange, Bonneville. But finally, Martin got up, got out, and walked into that gas station. And as he walked, headed to that gas station, these white thugs just sort of surrounded him. But he went on through. We sat there. It was summertime, the windows were down in the car. We sat there and watched as Martin Luther King talked to Mr. Adams. We don't know, I don't know what Martin Luther King said to Mr. Adams. But I know after a little while, after what seemed like a long time, Mr. Adams came out leading Martin. And I won't use the language that he used. It would turn the room purple. But he told him to give us some gas. We got the gas, and we headed in Reverend Reynolds' Orange, Bonneville, to A.G. Gaston Motel in Birmingham. Not one of us said one word between Mr. Adams' gas station and we pulled up into A.G. Gaston Motel in Birmingham. I asked Reverend Reynolds, I said, Nimrod, did you ever ask Martin what he said to Mr. Adams? He said, no, I didn't. I didn't either. I don't know what Martin Luther King said to Mr. Adams, but I know that I'm standing here tonight because Martin spoke some gospel word to Mr. Adams at that gas station that had the sign, we don't sell gas to niggers. Martin was somebody, folks. He was somebody. I miss him still. I miss him still. The nation misses him. But we can do something about it, can't we? We've named streets after him. We've named this library after him. We've named schools after him. We've named churches after him. But what we really need to do, folks, is to change America and to erase every vestige of bigotry and hate and poverty and exploitation of the poor in this nation. And we need to get the guns out of the hands of our people on the streets.